So hey there, thanks for checking out my videos. I do greatly appreciate it. So today we are going to go over in the OMVIC Student Manual, Chapter 12. So it's a couple pages long. It's pretty straightforward from that standpoint. It's the Motor Vehicle Dealer Compensation Fund. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I know you're excited to hear about that, but if you were a consumer and you're looking to do a claim through them, this would be a nice little review if you don't have the book. It'll also be a nice little item if you're going to go for that test. So again, it's open book, so you got to kind of memorize the chapters as far as where the information is, but it's one of those things where this could be helpful for you if you're kind of just starting out and maybe you haven't paid for the course yet. You just want to delve into it a little bit, maybe get an idea what it's all about. So why am I doing it? Well, I have two cars on Turo, which is a peer-to-peer car sharing program. So very much like a small little rental program, as you kind of think about. Think of it as a low barrier of entry to learn the rental business and get yourself kind of in that little realm. And I'm not really that experienced with it, so I've been doing it for about a year. Well, actually a little over a year with the Outlander. It's been doing okay. So it's one of those things where I thought, okay, well, let's add an additional car. And we did. We added a Chevy Cruze, which turned out to be a horrible idea. In this neck of the woods, the Chevy Cruze didn't really bring a lot to the table when it came to the daily rental rate. Also, it didn't have a high demand. So it was one of those things where it just kind of sat idle for an extended period of time. And I thought to myself, well, there's a perfectly safety car in great condition. Why don't I just sell it off, get my money back out of it, which is what I did. And I took that money, I let it sit for a little bit as I kind of thought about what I'm going to do. Went shopping for an RVR to complement the Outlander. And I couldn't find an RVR within the specifications that would meet Turo. In other words, everything I looked at had accident damage attached to it, or it had issues attached, right? Just didn't quite work. And then a Hyundai Genesis came up. And because I worked for Hyundai for quite a few years, I'm pretty fascinated by those cars. So it's one of those things where, is it the perfect car for Turo? I have no idea. It was one of those things where it was a 45-minute drive, got a reasonably good deal on it. We're going to put it on Turo. We'll see what happens. So it'll be an experiment. We'll see how it plays out. And it's a 2013, and if you're ever in Atwood, Ontario, or maybe you're in Kitchener-Waterloo, or you're in London, because I do get a lot of bookings out of that area, by all means, check out my cars. I'll leave a link down below. Greatly appreciate it. And if you're thinking of getting into Turo and you want to get your OMVIC license so you can become a car rental agent, or maybe perhaps a wholesaler, or God forbid, maybe a car dealer, maybe, or get a job at a fancy car dealership. Maybe that's what you want to do. So let's get into the chapter, because we did 3 minutes of yada, yada, yada. So let's move on. So, learning objectives. The purpose of the Motor Vehicle Dealer Act Compensation Fund. What we're going to learn. Let's have a little look. We're going to jump ahead. And basically, these are unscripted. So essentially what we're going to do is I'm going to read a little bit, and then we're going to use the old mind. I'm going to try and remember if I've experienced this in the past, or if I've had a fellow car salesperson who's had the honor of going through this program. So we'll have a little run through, and I'll try and put it into kind of a layman's term or an example. That's all. So let's see, introduction. So Motor Vehicle Dealers Compensation Fund, the fund, was established to compensate consumers who suffered financially. Losses arise from a transaction, sales, or lease with a registered motor vehicle dealer. So essentially what they did back in 2002, when they were coming up with OMVIC, is they created a little bit of a slush fund. So the idea here is that if you were stuck behind the 8 ball on a car that you just purchased, and you felt that the dealer had treated you unfairly or didn't disclose properly the information, or you had an issue with the car and you couldn't resolve it with the dealer, well, you could go to OMVIC and you could sit back and you say, okay guys, this is where I'm at, and they could act as kind of the go-between, right? So a lot of times they will try to mitigate the issue, and they'll it's kind of a way of getting you out from going through the court system and being tied into that for years. This is a great way of being able to go and say, look, this is the issue that I have. Please, third person in, help us out, right? From that standpoint. So who pays into the compensation fund? A general dealer or a broker pays $300 for each location from which the dealer is unauthorized to trade. So the dealers do. Dealers and wholesalers pay that. So it's one of those things where it goes into a little kitty, right? This is a one-time fee payable at the time of initial registration. This is not an annual fee. If the dealers add a location, then an additional $300 must be paid. So that's where the money comes from. A lease or financial dealer pays $300 to the fund when registration is granted. So in other words, we talked about who needs to get into an OMVIC license, and there's some hurdles as far as if you're going to be a leasing dealer. It's not cut and dry, and it's one of those things where it's pretty straightforward. Like as far as that's concerned, it's basically you're a financial arm, but it's one of those limited functions. So in other words, you're not really meant to be going to a wholesale license. You're not meant to be like selling cars to consumers. You're meant to be just acting as an agent. So it's one of those things where review the other chapter. It gets into that. These one-time fees are subject to change by the fund's board or trustees. Okay, so essentially what they're saying is that at any given time, given the environment and the economy, or perhaps there's an issue that's come along that they may need to increase the rates a little bit, or perhaps they found some great savings and they want to reduce. Probably never going to reduce them. But it's one of those things where if you were into this, you'd go, okay, well, that's where that's coming from. It's pretty straightforward. Salespeople do not pay into the fund. Should the fund be depleted by claims, dropping its holdings below $3 million. So essentially they're doing it like an insurance program, right? So it's not cut and dry. You have to sit down with somebody at OMVIC to go through a claim process or arbitration if you had a problem with a dealer, right? So it's one of those things where just complaining doesn't get it paid out. You have to go through the whole process and see if it's actually a legitimate concern. Okay, so in the event that there's a shortfall in the $3 million fund, let's say there was a major issue or something had a complete meltdown, there would be a little call to all the general dealers and all the pretty much everybody that paid in the fund. They'll pass the kitty around and say, hey guys, we're going to need a little more money this year. So I don't know if that's ever happened. I don't think I've ever experienced that where they've called up and said, hey, we need a couple $100. It's never really occurred as far as when I've had it. So they must be pretty good with the fund is what I'm getting at. Violations, claims against the fund. In order to file a claim, the consumer must have sufficient loss as a result of a transaction involving the purchase or lease of a motor vehicle. So again, pretty self-explanatory there. So if you've had a contract with a registered dealer or a leasing agent, or that would be pretty much it as far as that's concerned. So in other words, this is where we talked about curbers before. So if you bought a private deal, they're not going to cover you in any way, shape, or form. This is why when you're looking at cash cars in our Turo industry, when we're looking at that little $7,000 to $10,000 bridge point, sometimes it's better going to a dealer because you can go to the car, you have a recourse to go back later on. So it's one of those things where it's borderline, but it gets to be really tough to find a dealer that's going to sell you a car in that price point that'll meet Turo's requirements. But it's one of those things where check the trades, because you never know, there might be someone out there trying to get out of a car that's old inventory. So this is where having this fund or this slush kind of to go back later on if you had an issue. Okay. Circumstances such as these would be considered valid claims. So here's some issues. Law enforcement authority has seized the vehicle. In other words, you're driving along and you found out, unto any information that was provided to you from the dealer, that this vehicle is stolen, re-registered, or rebranded. Strangely enough, back in the mid-2000s, this was actually a pretty common thing. So what you'd find is that if you were a dealer, through no fault of your own, this could happen to anybody, even a consumer out there just buying off somebody. And it could be like you're the third person in. Like this could be something that's happened 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So revinning a car used to be pretty common. So they'd end up getting a vehicle that would have been stolen in Toronto, but they would have revinned it out of Quebec on a car that kind of matched, right? Then they changed the ownership in Ontario again from the Quebec one to match the VIN that they put on the dashboard. And then they would send it off and say, hey, it's a nice clean car, it's from Quebec, blah, 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 blah. Some of them would even match the odometer to match. Sometimes they do a few little things to kind of trickery on the car as well. So it was one of those things where that was actually pretty common. And it was one of those things where, kind of, I hate to say it, but it was kind of pre-internet stuff. Like, it's one of those things where a Carfax report kind of resolves a lot of this today. So does a vehicle history check when it comes to the manufacturer. Like, for instance, if I were looking at a vehicle and I wanted to make sure that the vehicle was actually, a legitimate car, I would run a Ontario check. So I'd go and spend the $20, see who owns it, see where it's been. I'd get the build sheet from the manufacturer, which you can get online. So it means I can go and check off and say, okay, it's got a sunroof, check. It's got leather seats, check. It's got blue. You know what I mean? Like, you can go through the options and features and make sure it matches up the build sheet. Then I would also check the service records, because most Carfax reports will give you the service records, and you can call a couple of the garages at random and kind of say, hey, have you actually seen this car recently? Which, funny enough, because what it'll mean is there'll be a second car out there sometimes on the same VIN. And the guy will go, yeah, it's on the hoist, which is, if you watch the news, Google it. That does happen, actually, as strange as that sounds. So it's one of those things where, a stolen vehicle can happen, and it's really nice that you've got the fund to be able to fall back into. Be able to say, hey, you know what? This is something that was a year ago, 2 years ago. It's turned up now. Like, they're tapping on your door now. It's never really quick. And, of course, they're going to take the vehicle. So you can go back to OMVIC and say, hey, guys, please help me out here. A creditor, other than the creditor of the customer, has legally seized the vehicle and, okay. So, again, this is where, strangely enough, we don't see a lot of this today. The main reason being is that the dealer service that they use for running the VINs to check for liens, as well as the financial institutions. In other words, if you financed a car, Scotiabank does a quick check, Royal Bank does a quick check. Most of the sublenders do a pretty quick little check, because they pay into a program that kind of just, it's not a limited item when it comes to VIN numbers. So we don't see a lot of that through the dealers anymore. Now, back in the day, yes, it would be where it was one of those really weird ones. It usually wouldn't be a big bank. It'd be like a third party or a sublender would have something attached to the car that had been paid out. In other words, either they missed the last two payments, or the buyout on the end was never taken care of. And for some strange reason, it just got blown into the ether. Just where did it go? And sometimes it shows up late, and a dealer can get nailed for that. So it's one of those things where 10 years ago, probably a bigger issue than today. Today, with Carfax, the online services that the dealers use, along with the financial institutions that they're usually tied to with a floor plan, the majority of the time the cars are going to be pretty clean when it comes to creditor issues. However, if you got into a dealer that had been overextended, it can happen. And maybe they're going through some financial issues, and maybe they don't clear the debt on the car after you paid for it. There's like paying Bob with Bill, Bill with Bob. You see a lot of that with kind of the little small little lots, and every once in a while you'll see a big dealer do that, but it's pretty rare today. There's usually a lot more red flags that come up before that. But it's one of those things that, at least with the OMVIC, you're covered, right? Claims for deficiencies the dealer has refused to remedy. Okay, so this would be like, let's say, we talked earlier about as-is cars and kind of fit for retail. So it's one of those things where if you bought a car, you felt that the dealer didn't disclose something, or it wasn't fit for retail, or there was something fundamentally wrong with it. So a good example would be, let's say you drove off the lot, and 3 days later you found out the engine was like filled with molasses to hide a knock, or you found that the transmission is held together by duct tape and hopes, right? So unbeknownst to you, you went to a legitimate dealer, had a safety done, and it doesn't meet the basic requirements for what would be considered a retailable car. Well, you could go to OMVIC and say, look, this is what I'm thinking is an issue. How do we want to remedy it? Now, it's a good idea to try and get the dealer to do something for you first, but it's one of those things where it's always a good idea to at least get a ticket so you're in line. So if you do have a problem, ring them up or send them an email and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. And again, if you were a good consumer and you did your research already, like we all do, we usually forget, but you can check OMVIC prior to buying the car to see if the dealer has a lot of complaints. So if you look at a dealer and you go, oh, well, it looks like they get a complaint every 2 or 3 years. Like you kind of go, well, that's kind of the average of kind of what happens in kind of retail. You're going to get the occasional oddball thing that happens, right? That's no control of anybody. It's just going to be an issue, right? That's in any industry. But if you find out that you look at it and kind of go, oh, this dealer has a lot of dumb OMVIC claims, like dumb stuff where you go, oh, okay. Like, and sometimes they're pretty minor. Like you look and kind of go, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's where the dealers forgot to register like extended warranties. But it's one of those things where if you look and kind of go, oh, well, that guy's got like 100 claims or 100 little notes from going to OMVIC. Maybe you want to make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are done in the contract. Maybe you want to kind of step back a little bit and say to yourself, is this the dealer I want to buy a car off of? Or you might want to say to yourself, okay, this is great, but maybe you need to get the services of a paralegal to go over the contract prior to you doing it. Or maybe you want to make sure like 100% that you're happy with the car, run it to an independent shop. Meineke does a great job if you want to get a vehicle inspection in Ontario. They're usually pretty good as far as when you say, hey, I'm looking at buying the car. Beyond a safety, can you tell me what is wrong with it? A couple of really good ones in Cambridge that have been superb, at least when I've taken my car in, where they'll give me a little heads up and say, hey, it's got a little seepage, or it's got a couple little things on it, and if you're buying a cheap car, they're bound to have stuff. Safety doesn't cover perfection, right? So you need to know ahead of time. So it's a good idea anyways. The dealer has been convicted of an offense in connection with the sale or lease of vehicles. Okay, so this is where, again, you want to check the history with OMVIC. But let's say, and today it's really hard, so it's not really a common issue. But again, back in the day, you can't really roll back the odometer anymore because it's not really it's a digital system. You'd have to have some pretty fancy equipment to do it, and really the cost to do that, and on top of it, the fines, the jail time, the hassle to get a dealer license in the first place. You're going to find that odometer tamping and hiding things is going to be more associated with curbers, or guys kind of doing the fly-by-night sale stuff. So that's where you kind of have to watch when you're buying stuff of Facebook and Kijiji. It's always a good idea to make sure documentation paperwork is in place. But if the dealer did get charged with running stolen cars, changing VINs, playing with the odometer, or financial fraud, so a whole host of stuff when you're talking dealership. If you're a franchise owner, or you're a mid-sized dealer, you're not going to bother dealing with this tampering stuff. It doesn't make any sense. The risk is just way too high as far as that's concerned. And the other one is, it's a lightning rod for like other stuff. So unless you're like it's one of those things, it's not that common, but it's nice to know that if you did have an issue, you'd have OMVIC to fall back on. Customers that have given a deposit but the dealer has not provided the vehicle or an alternative acceptable solution for the consumer. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so I've experienced this. So you'll go in and you'll leave a deposit down on a car. Inadvertently, either the car the safety was too high. This is typically what happens. So the dealer hasn't safety the car yet. It's been in inventory. He has it on a floor plan, which means he's got it financed. He's running the vehicle based on the deal that we just made, right? But he's now got it to the shop, and he's found out that he's got to replace 4 tires and do the brakes all the way around. Whereas prior to it sitting on the lot for 30 days, it would have been okay. So now the deal is upside down in his book, right? So he'll look at it and go, well, it's in the red. So sometimes they'll try and back out of a deal. It happens. as far as that's concerned, by saying that the vehicle is no longer available. And sometimes they'll hold your deposit kind of captive to get you to move to another car. So if that's the situation, you can call OMVIC and say, hey guys, such and such has held my Visa deposit, or such and such has, done this. And usually that's a pretty quick remedy. Like OMVIC's really fast on those refunds. Usually they don't really take them to the whole claims process. Usually it's a phone call. Like that's really what happens. It's from usually their inspector. It's like, hey guys, fix it now. So usually it's like boom. So be aware of that. It's a fast track, and it's not that common today, because what'll happen is you're going to go on the old internet, like everybody, and you're going to leave a raving review about how amazing the service was and how they were able to hold on to your money for an extended period of time and put you on a deal, right? So it's not a common occurrence. It's not what it was back in the day. Deposits on the phone, though, to hold a car, that's a pretty common thing for the dealer to hold on to, because they think they've lost business because it took you a day to get down there to go over the car, and then you decide not to buy it. So it's one of those things that's a common one, and usually it's a couple $100, and they're hoping that you say okay and you walk away. That's usually a smaller rinky-dinky dealers kind of deal. Most franchise dealers don't want that because they don't want the bad reviews, right? Again, that's a phone call to OMVIC. So it's one of those things. You may not be aware of that. Okay, so let's see what else is there. The customer has made a payment for an unsecured extended warranty or service plan sold by the dealer or facilitated by the dealer, and the dealer is unable to provide the service. Okay, for example, a dealer closes 2 years in a 3-year warranty. The consumer would claim the 1/3 of the warranty cost. Okay, so I've actually experienced this. So I worked for a franchise dealer that had bought a franchise dealer that had financial problems. So when they left everything in turmoil. So they didn't pay into their slush fund to cover warranty coverage, because the gentleman that had the dealership prior to, I'm not going to get into names, basically walked out, and for all intents and purposes would have filed bankruptcy, or just, it was the end, right? So when the new buyer of the dealership picked up the dealership, you had an issue with people coming in thinking that their warranty would be covered by the new dealer, which isn't the case, right? It's the old company that would have been covering it, not the new company. It'd be like coming in and saying, hey, how would I put this? You bought a house, right? And you put a nice new furnace in it, but you had financing. You sold the house. Well, you should have paid the furnace off. The guy that bought the house isn't responsible for it, right? It's one of those things where it becomes a cluster of everything going around. So it's one of those things where OMVIC will basically step in and say, here you go, we will help you out with that warranty issue. Keep in mind, they don't do a full refund. So it's one of those things, if you're going in saying, hey, I want my whatever I paid for it because it's no longer valid, and they're not going to cover any work prior to the time that you lost that warranty because of either insolvency or fraud. So that's one of those things. So they would refund the portion of the warranty that you didn't use based on time. So it's like a prorated type of deal. So it's one of those things where you can go a little further with it. You could ask to sit down with them and try and arbitrate it. But to be honest with you, there really isn't a lot to arbitrate there. It's kind of take your little bag of money, and hopefully you can take that and apply it to whatever repair that's been missed. The dealer's gone bankrupt, for an example. If a dealer was obligated to pay out a lien on a vehicle received in trade-in but goes bankrupt before doing so, okay, so the customer could claim for the amount of the unpaid lien. So again, this is where we got into the first one, where we're talking, why did you buy from an OMVIC dealer, or why would you get a registered dealer deal? It's because of that. So again, it's not whether or not the dealer goes bankrupt. It's as if 6 months has passed, but it hasn't caught up to the car registry yet. And actually, that's one of those things where I looked at where we had that little upset for a couple of years, where the car market went weird and crazy. A lot of that paperwork fell to the side. So I'm going to assume that at some point, kind of after that 3rd year or 5th year finance contract, when you go to trade your car in, there's probably going to be something there, like in the future, where someone hasn't cleared it because of the great reset or upset in the car business during the whole, the event, right? So I'm predicting that might be an issue on that 4-year-old and that 6-year-old car when it comes to trading in and reselling privately. So that's where you really want to do a Carfax or car proof report, where you want to really go and do a background check to make sure that there isn't lingering something that's just kind of paperwork from a prior transaction. And it may be that it's already been cleared up, it just was never registered as cleared. I've experienced that a couple of times, where you'll go to a car and it'll say, oh, there's 3 payments remaining. GMAC back in the day used to do that. Like it was kind of a norm whenever you went to go do like an old Cavalier or an S10 pickup truck. There'd always be something still lingering from GMAC. And then GMAC went and changed financial institutions. They did something there where they kind of changed the books, and then some of it got lost. So a lot of it was already paid. It was just a matter of calling them and saying, hey guys, what do you want to do with this? And the majority of the time what would happen is it would take them about a month or 2 to kind of resolve the issue. But a lot of times it would be the customer already paid for it. It's just they never really cleared it on the actual ownership. So don't get too crazy about that. It's one of those things you have to pick up the phone and call the lender and see what's going on, especially if it's under like $3,000. So sometimes that's just where it's kind of just lost the pitter patter at the tail end, where they just didn't clear anything up, especially if the person held on to the car. So if they paid it off and then they didn't get rid of it right away, they drove it for another year or 2 before they decided to sell it or trade it in. Well, they never resolved it during that ownership switch because they didn't switch the ownership. So just be aware of it. So it's one of those things, again, if it falls on the cracks, OMVIC will help you out with that. So that's kind of nice. Court order. Okay, so yeah, so let's say you went through, instead of going through OMVIC, you went through the courts, and they ordered the dealer to pay the customer. So they get into this. So let's say you decide, instead of going through OMVIC, you decide to go through the courts. You have that option. You can in Ontario, Consumer Protection Act. And the court sided with you. So you went, okay, for whatever reason, we can get into a whole host of stuff as to why you could win a court case with a dealer. It's pretty straightforward. And then if the dealer isn't going to pay, and you go, well, okay, I got this judgment, that's wonderful. How do I get that? Well, you go to OMVIC and say, hey, look, I've got this judgment in place from the courts. The dealer doesn't want to pay the judgment, so they will dip into the fund, they will pay you out. And then what normally happens is they will chase after the dealer during licensing and registration time. So usually it's a bit of a nightmare all the way around. So most dealers, unless there's like something fundamentally wrong, will want to pay that court, unless they're planning to go and fight it again, right? So, which I guess that could be a business model. You keep running lawyer debt. That's wonderful. Okay, claim for the refund owed to a consumer entitled to recession under Clause 50, 10B, or 11B of the MVDA 2002, Chapter 6. Okay, so we'll get into that specific when we do Chapter 6. We haven't done Chapter 6, so. Okay, consumers can claim up to $45,000 for losses on one proven claim against a registered dealer. The previous maximum was $15,000. So that pretty much covers your bread and butter car, I think, in today's market. So they've upped it up to $45,000. Maybe it's a little more today because this book is a little old, so we could Google that later if you wanted to. So you're going to walk into the dealership and you're probably going to see the little OMVIC, or at least it'll look something like this, usually on the front door, or there'll be a plaque in the salesman's office, or there'll be a display somewhere. The displays are kind of gone. You don't see those too often, but it'll be in the advertising literature. Usually, the stickers are actually really common still. When you walk into a new car franchise, usually at the service door, you'll see the OMVIC sticker. It means that they're registered dealers, right? So that's pretty normal. So they're trying to make it so that you're aware that when you go in, you've got rights and protections under them. So in other words, they're just trying to educate you. Now, if you're doing any shopping, you'll find that things like Kijiji on the front page will sometimes run this with an explanation on why you should be looking at buying from a registered dealer, right? So there'll be an explanation there. Auto Trader used to do that too. I haven't really seen that often. It used to be a pop-up that would come up, especially if you're looking at certain price points. It would have a little tag that goes, hey, hold on a second. Confirm that they're a registered dealer. So it's one of those things where they do try and educate the consumer that it's available. Most consumers have no idea the compensation fund exists, which is unfortunate, right? So it's one of those things where on the back of your contract, after you go through like the 7 pages, I should do that. I should pull out a contract and we should review that. If we get into a chapter where they are doing that, we'll go through the clauses. But a lot of dealers will actually put the OMVIC brochure in, or they'll put the OMVIC card. I had one dealer who used to actually put in the local inspector, so the one that would come in and do the checks. The reason being is that if you're a franchise dealer or you're an upper level used car dealer, you would sooner prefer that if there was an issue or a breakdown in communication, that your client would call OMVIC. And I know they're going to have a little tizzy fit about it when I say this, but they really don't want you going in the court system. They really don't. And if it's something that they can resolve, most like franchise dealers and most upper level, they put a little slush fund together anyways to help with this. But it's one of those things where they don't really want a huge process. So if the OMVIC, if you call an inspector, you call the number and you explain the situation, and maybe you're wrong, like as a consumer, right? And maybe that's why the dealer is saying no, but maybe you're right as a consumer. So it's nice to have that. It's not really an independent party, but a third person coming in before you get courts and lawyers involved to be able to say, hey, maybe there's an easy solution to this. Here's a quick, and a lot of folks will have that where they'll go, okay, we felt the car was misrepresented, yada, 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 yada. What's the real underlying problem? The car may not be the issue. The issue may be that you don't feel that you paid fair market value for it, or there's an underlying problem associated with an extended warranty that was, omitted or wasn't clear, right? So it's one of those things where sometimes it's little nuances in things that cause a problem. So that's where being able to call them and say, hey, look, this is the issue. Most dealers do want to work with you, right? It's a reputation of the industry is kind of there, right? Back in the day, like in the 80s, it was kind of like, good luck with that. But now today, it really is, it's a very professional industry from that standpoint. Reimbursing the fund, if a customer has a sufficient loss as a result of the trade, the dealer should do anything possible to correct. So in other words, this is what they're saying. So prior to OMVIC wanting to get involved, they do want you to run through the dealer, and they want to have the dealer actually try and resolve the issue. So they want the opportunity for the dealer to say, hey, there's a mechanical issue. And if it's something pretty minor, opportunity to fix it, right? Try and resolve the problem. If it's something where it's a clerical issue or there's an issue with billing, please try and resolve that. Maybe there's a reversal on a credit card that didn't get done properly. These are things that need to be resolved. So that's one of those things where, again, that's where the dealer should step in before they go to OMVIC. But at the same time, sometimes the consumer just gets lost and you kind of go, okay, I'm going to go this route. Again, it's one of those things where that's what the fund is there for. So it's also a really great resource, again, for checking out a dealer prior to actually buying the car. So if you go on the OMVIC website, you can actually check your salesperson to see if that they're registered, and then you can check the dealer, confirm they're registered, which they usually are. But then you can also go into their claims process. You can actually see how that dealer kind of works in the industry. So if you get into a shop where you go, okay, as we talked you use that as a caveat to say, let's go over everything. Or you can say to yourself, okay, well, maybe I can go to the other new car showroom that doesn't have a pile of documentation associated with them, right? As far as that's concerned. And sometimes if you're buying a bread and butter car and you're buying it from a new car franchise, that's the easiest solution. Where you say, oh, I checked your ratings, and yes, online the Google rating is good and you got 5 stars. Then you go and you check the OMVIC, which isn't rated like a 5-star system, but you go, well, look at all these complaints. Well, then maybe, common sense would be there are other sources for new cars. Used cars are a little different. So if you're that type of guy that's just looking for that one particular type of car because you're crazy, and you're going to buy it from that dealer anyways, well then Bob's your uncle, go over the paperwork. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit. Again, I do apologize. I do try and keep these things around 30 minutes. We did the yada yada in the beginning. That was 3 minutes, so it is what it is. If you find this helpful at all, it's just a frank discussion. I don't guarantee the information is accurate because I am using an old book. So again, I think a lot of this stuff is actually on the internet now. But it's just one of those things where maybe you're confused or you need to get the confidence to go to the course, and you're just trying to get an idea again as to whether or not you should spend the money to get this or not, right? So again, you can follow through. I'm going to try and do each chapter, follow the chapters, and go from there. And if you're out there and you're saying to yourself, hey, I've got a language barrier or an educational issue. Maybe you didn't finish high school and it's been bugging you in your head. Or maybe you didn't, maybe you're actually switching careers and your real profession is, maybe you're a dentist and you're going crazy. You're going to become a car salesman. It's one of those things where it's a good idea to do the coursework first, just so you get an idea what it is all about. And if you're out there thinking it's a task that you can't do because there's limitations involved, leave a comment. Just say, hey, Keith, this is what I'm dealing with. What are your thoughts? Maybe I can help you out a little bit. Go from there. Again, I'm looking for content for the internet anyways. So if there's something there where you kind of go, could you research this for me and help me out? I'll try as far as that's concerned. And if you're out there going, you know what, I need a little help, send a message. Who knows? Maybe I'll do a 30-minute video on your topic and we can kind of review it. Maybe you're having an issue with the nuances on how to calculate a lease. Maybe you're working with the circle square deal, which is crazy in today's day and age. Maybe you have an old school manager. You don't quite understand the terminology they're using. Just send a message. We'll do what we can do. Have a pleasant and enjoyable day. And again, if you could subscribe, that would be great. I think I'm at 400 down below, which is amazing considering this is probably the world's most boring discussions. But hey, there's a tight crew there that seem to be interested. If you subscribe, it means I'm going to put a little more money and energy into perhaps upgrading my Samsung phone and maybe getting a lapel mic, that type of thing. So it's one of those deals, right? As it gets busier and I see more action, I will start investing into this. Otherwise, it's just basically a Turo hobby with an offshoot. Okay, have a pleasant and enjoyable day. We'll talk to you later.